Game of Thrones Season 7 episode Beyond the Wall gave audiences some of the most on-the-nose hinting at a relationship between Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. Every time the two of them have been on screen together this season, fans have gone wild. Both Jon and Daenerys have learned new things about the other and seen how they respond in stressful moments. As satisfying as a relationship may be for some fans, the truth remains that these two characters are related. Last season it was revealed that Jon's true father is Rhaegar Targaryen, making Dany his aunt. While it's unclear whether or not they will ever discover that they are related, hopefully the show doesn't give us another full-fledged incest-based relationship. It's been clear from the very beginning that Jaime and Cersei Lannister are related, giving the audience an action to immediately realize there is something off about the Golden Twins. Well, things are a bit different this time, so read on to find out more about Game of Thrones. 15 times fans forgot Dany and Jon are aunt and nephew. Just a heads up, this post will feature spoilers for Beyond the Wall, because it definitely kicked things up a notch between the two of them. Part of what makes Davos Seaworth such an effective Hand of the King is the fact that he calls it like he sees it. If something seems fishy or immature to him, he has no problem pointing it out. Jon recently found out his ability to speak the truth isn't limited to conversations about ideas or values. In fact, Davos knows how to embarrass someone just like the father he is. After Jon and Dany have spent a little time getting used to each other on Dragonstone, Jon tells Davos he believes Dany has a good heart. When Davos replies that helps noticed him staring at her good heart, it's pretty obvious what he's referring to. Instead of recoiling or reacting with surprise, Jon pauses for a moment and simply goes, "There's no time for that," before explaining that facing the Night King is his true priority. In last night's episode, Tyrion Lannister and Dany spend some time talking together in the Dragonstone war room about all kinds of things. In the midst of a conversation intended to get her to heed his advice, he reveals that he believes Jon has fallen in love with Dany. While Dany dismisses it and calls it ridiculous, she reveals that even if it were true, he's not necessarily her type because he's too little. In that moment he's thinking about Jon and comparing him to her former lovers like Khal Drogo or Daario Naharis, who were both physically bigger and more bombastic in their personality. But how many people do we know who end up with someone who's not their type? When Jon and Dany first come eye to eye, it's pretty obvious that Dany is trying to assert her dominance. Not only were Jon and the rest of his allies from the north forced to turn over their boating weapons to the Dothraki, but they were greeted by a cold Targaryen queen sitting in a throne carved from Dragonstone. Dany was above and separate from Jon. Even when he, a king in his own right, took a step towards Dany, he was quickly stopped by her Dothraki guards. Instead of treating Jon warmly, Dany created a false sense of separation between the two of them. Sure, they may be equals, but she is above him, constantly looking down and judging him throughout this scene. It sets up their change of hearts in Beyond the Wall perfectly. It's easy to forget that just because Dany and Jon are sullen characters doesn't mean that Kit Harington and Emilia Clarke are equally dreary. In fact, whenever the cast of Game of Thrones is featured in a photo shoot, their personalities come through and joy can finally be seen on some of these actors' faces. Here, it's easy to forget that Jon and Dany are anything but normal teenagers. They're both about 15 in the books. Sure, they're wearing some crazy costumes, but their goofiness beautifully shines through in this photo. Dany is a bit of a smiler, but Jon might as well be the living embodiment of the North. He's so reserved. This might even be the first time we see Dany hold a two-handed longsword, and let's just say she certainly needs some work. Despite only knowing each other for a few episodes, Jon and Dany are big bickerers. When they first met, Jon was forced to comply with Dany's wishes and was essentially told to go away. After that encounter, Jon isn't sure whether he is a prisoner or a freeman on Dragonstone. He went there to ask for her help, not be treated like a child. Sure, their relationship improves over time, but they have no problem telling the other exactly how they feel. When Dany is considering attacking the Lannisters with her dragons, Jon bluntly and clearly explains to her why he thinks that would turn the townsfolk against her. He gave her great advice and for a moment it looks like she agrees, but at the end of the day she did the exact opposite of what he recommended. Ever since Season 2 of Game of Thrones, Azor Ahai has become a major talking point. Originally, Melisandre believed that Stannis Baratheon was the prince who was promised, and she pushed hard for him to sit on the Iron Throne. After his death, Melisandre rallied hard behind the possibility that Jon Snow is in fact Azor Ahai and is destined to fight off the Long Night. The only problem is, her translation is wrong according to Missandei. Instead of the prophecy referring simply to a prince, it refers to a prince or princess, leaving the door open for Dany to claim the mantle for herself or fight alongside Jon. The idea of a prince and princess who were promised fighting together conjures up an image of two lovers dueling side by side instead of two relatives. Sure, a brother-sister team of Tommen and Myrcella could have challenged the Whites, but there is something more romantic and in line with the rules George R.R. Martin has established for the prophecy to be referring to two lovers instead of relatives. The only reason Jon and Dany even cross paths is because Jon needs help fighting the Night King. At first, Dany doesn't believe him and simply states her desire for Jon to bend the knee and ally the North with her cause. Dany is reluctant to offer any assistance, but Tyrion is eventually able to persuade her to allow Jon to mine the dragonglass under Dragonstone as a sign of good faith. No matter how much their relationship improves during their time together, Jon is still unable to convince Dany to join his fight. After he shows her some cave paintings that include images of the Night King, he asks her again to fight with him instead of waste time on political squabbles with the Lannisters. Even though she eventually believes that the threat is real, she still reiterates her desire for Jon to bend the knee. If he does that, Dany says they can join forces, but Jon is unwilling to betray the trust of his people and maintains his status as King of the North. When Jon first meets Dany, he cuts Davos off before he can tell her about his betrayal by the Night's Watch and subsequent resurrection. Dany notices this line and spends some time thinking about the issue, even asking Tyrion if he noticed anything fishy about the way Jon cut Davos off so abruptly when he mentioned a knife in the heart. Beyond the Wall finally set the record straight for Dany. After his close call with a White Horde, Jon is stripped from his freezing clothes and left in a bed to warm up and recover. His multiple, deep wounds are exposed and Dany finally understands what he has sacrificed for his people. Some of the gazes Daenerys sends his way are incredibly intense. She even sits beside him at his bed and is right there as he finally wakes up after their battle with the Night King. It's no secret that the Starks have deep connections with their direwolves. Arya finally came face-to-face with Nymeria again this season after 6 long years and ghost fights alongside Jon when the budget allows for it. What was a bit more surprising was the fact that Jon had no problem approaching Drogon after he returned from torching some Lannisters. As of now, Tyrion Lannister is the only other person to touch one of the dragons and live, excluding Dany. When Tyrion approached the dragons, he too was in a rocky relationship with Dany. Sure, they were close, but there was still a level of distrust among them, just like when Jon had his moment with Drogon. Book readers know there are rumors that Tyrion is actually the Mad King's bastard child, but in the show there is no reason to think he's a Targaryen. As a result of that, when Jon and Drogon connect, it's easy to think they are bonding for a reason other than the fact that Jon and Dany are secretly related. It may be hard to remember considering all of the crazy things Game of Thrones has thrown at audiences over the last few years, but during Season 2 of Book 2 Dany visited a place called the House of the Undying in Court. When she is there, the Undying, a group of ancient warlocks, give her a substance that causes a series of lucid hallucinations as she wanders around. Daenerys' visions touch on numerous things, one of them even foreshadowed the Red Wedding, but one of the most interesting ones included a blue flower growing out of a hole of ice. The ice likely symbolizes the wall while the flower represents Lyanna Stark. Dany experienced numerous visions at the house, but this one referring to Jon was last, hinting at his important role in Dany's life story. This article already references how enjoyable it is to see the cast of Game of Thrones appear in laid-back photo shoots. A few years ago, Rolling Stone published a collection of photos by Peggy Sirota that included Alfie Allen Theon, Lena Hadley Cersei, Kit Harington, and Emilia Clarke. All of the photos are great, but this shot that WASNT included in the final spread made the biggest splash. At this point, Dany and Jon didn't even know one another existed, so to see the actors share such a personal, intimate moment is quite lovely. In her Instagram post, Sirota described the set as full of chemistry, so when she asked Clarke and Harington to smooch, there was no problem. As she says in her image description, "I suppose love was in the air. Nothing says I have a crush on someone quite like trying to stop that person from leaving." After Jon receives word of trouble up north, he tells Dany about his intentions to leave Dragonstone and return home to fight alongside his people, instead of volunteering to go with him, which, frankly, would have made a lot more sense from the get-go. She tries to stop him from embarking on such a dangerous mission. At this point Jon, who had been a polite, begrudging prisoner up to this point, states that he doesn't need her permission and continues on with his plan. Even though it's his bravery that Dany is partially attracted to, she doesn't want Jon to put himself in harm's way. Even though Dany tries to maintain a tough exterior, she's a kind, loving person. After spending a few days a week since this season's timeline is so haphazard together, Dany and Jon have a new respect and admiration for one another. So when Jon declares that he intends to lead the mission north of the Wall, Dany experiences more than one emotion. A sense of admiration is clearly present in Dany's eyes after she hears Jon's intentions. After he left, she even tells Tyrion that she has grown used to him. While those words sound innocent, it's pretty clear from her tone and look on her voice that her admiration for Jon is slowly turning into full-fledged feelings. Jon Snow might look like a heartthrob, but he's really just a shy kid. When he first met Ygritte, he was too nervous to tell her how he felt and even felt uncomfortable around her. Well, that all changed when he entered a cave north of the Wall with her. Something similar happened this season on Game of Thrones. As Jon and his people are hard at work mining for dragonglass, he takes a break to escort Dany into the cave and show her some paintings. The two of them share an intimate moment and it's pretty obvious that they are both checking each other now that there are no intrusive eyes. While Jon and Dany didn't do anything steamy in the cave, perhaps the fact that they spent some time there together to hint at a future relationship. In Beyond the Wall, Jon finally decided to metaphorically bend the knee and pledge allegiance to Dany. As things north of the Wall became too much to handle, Jon realizes that their only chance of victory includes Dany and her dragons. His season-long resistance to joining Dany finally dissolved away and he assures her that she is a worthy leader and a good person. His insistence that the people of the North will learn to respect her only emphasizes how much he thinks she is the leader the realm needs. As if that isn't important enough, the fact that he called Daenerys Dany added an emotional aspect to the scene. Daenerys mentioned that the only person to call her Dany was her extremely creepy, abusive brother. Little does she know that the newest person to call her that nickname is actually her nephew. As they hold hands and pledge to work together, Jon finally refers to Daenerys as my queen and a powerful pairing has been cemented. Have you been rooting for a romance? Have you remained painfully aware of the fact that this Game of Thrones pairing is actually related? Sound off in the comment section below. Ad-free browsing, over 10,000 videos all in one access. Join for free. Go Premium with SCRENINT. Go Premium.